support our tongue. You will never be the same.
And with the full catastrophe, he didn't mean it was all bad.
God that I worship has a way of saying, don't play with.
I invite you to the dance with the Lord of the dance.
God didn't call America to do what she's doing in the world now.
Please dance.
All right, hi everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Remote Pastoral Care, the longest and most hilariously titled episode about things that are far more dramatic and crazy than you expect. Today, instead of our usual one or two people conversation, and sorry, I don't know what a one-person conversation would be. Today we are joined by four people. Yes, sir. Thank you. I actually do quite a lot of those one-person conversations. Come to think of it.
Frankly, I'm shocked.
So I'm joined today by our regular contributors, Courtney Fraley, whom you all know from most of the rest of our videos, Steve Augustin, who's been in one already, and then we've got two new people. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves for the awaiting masses of 5 or 6 people who actually watch these things?
I love that. I am Emmie. I work as a pediatric hospital chaplain, and I am friends with Don from our time as hospital chaplain interns together. And so we've always got fun pastoral care topics between us of like stupid shit that people said to patients when we were seeing patients, and just like general hopes for the church and hopes for how like we as people of faith can push through with progress. And so it's super fun to be here.
All right. Well, I'm glad to have you. And I'm going to be making at least 1 or 2 in-jokes as things go on, so I may have to explain those.
Well, I'm JJ. I know Don from our time at Princeton Seminary, and have the honor and privilege of pastoring United Church of Christ congregation here in the lovely city of Watertown, New York. Our claim to fame is that we are 30 miles away from the Canadian border. So, woohoo!
Woohoo!
So I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
So you're a boot in Canada, you might say.
I guess you could say so, eh?
Eh?
Don't make me pull out the Uber accent, guys. Nobody wants to hear it.
I know at least one of our subscribers on YouTube is a Canadian living here in Japan, so that joke was just for them. All right, so we have got, with a group like this, we've got a host of topics we could probably dig into. But I think there's one with this many people from this diverse of backgrounds, there's one that we should probably segue into, and I'm going to leave that to Courtney and Steve to kick us off here, since you want to present to the pastors here, as it were. What do we want to talk about today?
I've been kind of wanting for a while to talk about what is the church's problem with the gay community. Why, like, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot in the Bible about it. I've heard a lot of mixed things about the passages that are there. It's the whole, how much do you even consider stuff from the Old Testament thing? Why is that in particular such a big deal to so many people? Like, why do they care?
Well, that's a good place for us to start, I guess.
And I think the springboard off that, I would want to talk about a little bit about just, it kind of feeds into that. It may be an underlying issue in general for all the problems, but what's with what I see as biblical illiteracy in the evangelical community and right-wing Protestantism. Your typical rural or suburban Christians that are likely to have a problem with the gay community have so many other things going on there too, where they're just cherry picking scripture or interpreting it poorly or getting poor interpretations fed to them from their clergy.
Yeah, or from their family. I'll start by sharing that I'm a queer woman, and one of my dear friends is someone who grew up in a fundamentalist household, portraying themselves as like a more progressive evangelical household of like, well, we're not like those fundamentalists, basically. Like, we really think about the context of scripture. And we were talking about queer issues one night at her kitchen table, and her mom came back with a 19-page clobber passages printout from the internet, and just sort of dropped it on the table and said, take a read. This was her daughter.
The passive aggression in quote unquote, what? Unlimited minutes. Okay. So the passive aggression that you're talking about happening is something that I think we see a lot in the quote unquote moderate evangelical Christians, where it's like, it's not so much that the views are different, it's that they want to pad them and make it look like, I completely don't tolerate you or your lifestyle choices, which if I never hear that again, it'll be too soon. But it's with love, and it's like, are you acting with love?
And I'll speak as the designated cishet white guy here in the conversation. As I said earlier, the guy who checks all of the boxes for a person who should not be talking about this subject. I'll go ahead and say that a lot of this has to do with control, and I will even run the risk of being completely out of line by referencing something said by Dr. King here, where he talked about the moderate as being the problem. And I think that is true on a multitude of issues. And I am a guy who fancies myself a bit of a radical, and I've always said that a moderate in cases of justice is someone who is a radical but doesn't want to get judged for it. And I think that's really
wants
what
to save their own skin.
Yeah. If you're a moderate who says, well, you can be here, I don't want to judge, but I just don't want you to put it in my face. You're judging, you just don't want to be judged for it. And that's really all it is.
Yeah.
So I think another thing that has to be talked about, Brene Brown has a podcast. I cannot remember the name of the episode, but she talked about the power of having a shared enemy.
Yeah.
And how that creates community for certain folks. And when you look at evangelicalism, what fuels the evangelical movement, especially when it comes to voting and the political power that the evangelical movement has, they have historically been two-issue people.
Yeah.
Those issues are LGBTQ equality, LGBTQIA plus equality, and abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you look at the history of the abortion issue, when it comes to the Supreme Court in the United States, the Supreme Court for the longest time has been majority conservative, and yet Roe v. Wade has never been overturned. Yep. And so that says something about
a good law.
Exactly. It says something about how those two issues have become political pawns to sway voters to be on the Republican or conservative side, the GOP side of things every time it comes time to vote. Because we never hear about these issues being issues until there's an election cycle going on. And so now they've become so ingrained in the way the evangelical church has rooted itself theologically that there's this amalgamation of both theology and politics that I think fuels exactly what Dr. King was talking about when he talks about the white moderate being the people who are most evil or most dangerous.
Yeah, and that is, and I love the fact that you went there right the hell off the bat. is the intersection of church and politics. I mentioned earlier that it's all about control structures. Well, politics is the biggest control structure we've got. And is it, any wonder that this issue is directly connected?
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of people complain. This is like one of the things that the evangelical atheists, as I like to call them, love to spout off about how the church is the root of so much evil in the world. And I feel like if it wasn't for the ambition towards like power, political or otherwise, I mean, I guess all power is political. That's its own weird thesis there. But I just think it's the pursuit of power in general that's the issue, the pursuit of control and all of that. I feel like there's going to be a problem with that, whether you've got religion in the picture or not. And I just felt like that needed to be interjected in here because it's one of those things. I mean, my dance with religion has been wild and varied, but also like
we all share that.
I really just get frustrated with, and again, I refer to them as evangelical atheists, the ones that it's like, but you need to hear the good news about not God.
So I would agree with Courtney, and this may shock some folks. I mean, being someone who serves as a pastor, I do think, as shocking as it may be, that the church is in a lot of respects evil. The church has been responsible for so much harm, especially as it relates to LGBTQ folks. And I hope that those who are listening to me understand that I stopped the alphabet at Q, but I'm very mindful of those who are intersex and asexual and who are beyond those things. So it's just easier for me to rattle off LGBTQ, but I definitely don't want this to be heard as any form of erasure. Right. But I do think that we, especially those of us who are clergy people, have to be accountable to the accusation and the allegation that the church is evil. We can't walk away from that and act as if it's not true. And I think we need to put the mirror in front of us and say, how are we guilty of perpetuating a system of hurt and harm against people who the church should be open to? I mean, I serve as a pastor, but I wrestle with my place in the institution every day. Because I was one who thought I could change this system from the inside out. And I've been on the side of receiving harm from the inside. And so what happens when you come in wanting to be somebody who flips the system and the system flips on you? So I'm right there with you, Courtney.
That's one thing you and I have in common, is we've both gone through a couple of different systems trying to do that too.
Absolutely. I think it also needs to be said that it's nice just to have someone to talk to about this, because when Courtney mentioned the evangelical atheists, it's like when you want to have a discussion about LGBTQ rights or abortion or whatever, and you're having a discussion with progressives who are evangelical atheists, the second you bring up any religious ground, suddenly your points have no value to them, which is super frustrating. And then that's also, I've had dealt with a few of those before, and it's just like, I'm tired. I don't want my faith getting dragged through the mud by either side.
That's in so many circles, like any circle where you want to talk about anything like high-minded in any way. Like the second that I let it slip, like partway through the semester in my philosophy 101 class back at community college, that I was Christian, I watched on some people's faces their respect for me drop, and the way that I got treated by my classmates in any kind of discussion was immediately like so much more dismissive. And I was just like, really? It wasn't like I was constantly piping up about Jesus or whatever. It was,
and that has its own separate thing that where it backfires, because you've got the extreme evangelical Christians that are pushing this narrative of persecution, and the fact that that happens plays into that in some real dangerous ways too.
I think it's always dangerous to claim victimhood when it's not there. It's very easy for people outside of a circle to point to other people's complaint of victimhood and be like, that's not real. But the fact of the matter is, when it comes to being Christian, being white, being straight, you know, all of it, there is inherent, like if you are part of the inherent majority of a population, no, just by default, you are not really oppressed. That's not how societies work. But at the same time, there are going to be, that doesn't mean individual incidences of like discriminatory behavior don't happen towards people in a majority. And I feel like it really kind of is obnoxious the way that a lot of, like, I mean, I don't think, a couple of you, Don and Steve, are close friends of mine. I don't know that I've ever brought up that happened in college to either one of you, because it didn't really affect my overall life and all that much. It was just that semester and part of that semester, and it was one class. Like, it doesn't matter all that much. It's not real oppression. But I feel like there's this tendency of like mainstream Christianity to like look for places that they can point to and be like, aha, see, we are oppressed. We are, you know, being mistreated for our religion. It's like, no, that's not how any of this works.
There's a historical piece, because so much of our identity is rooted in this idea of, you know, the Christians being fed to the lions. We're the persecuted. That's kind of like who we are, which, you know, is bull. It's complete crap.
But I would push that a little further and say that the erroneous thinking around Christians always being the persecuted group actually is rooted in a core tenet of our theology, that Jesus was crucified, right? That there was some salvific power in him dying on a cross. And so I say, to uproot the victimhood, we have to uproot the doctrine of the cross being salvific, which would piss a lot of people off, because it is that piece at the center of Christianity that allows us to lean into our martyrdom, or the martyrdom complex. You know, we like, it gives us license to believe that, oh, I'm going into the world as a lamb to the slaughter and they're all out to get me. So there's that piece. And then there's also the piece that we, as clergy, I mean, I can't speak for those who aren't in this position, but like, it's our task to expand what it means to be a Christian. So I think it's up to us to remind people over and over and over again that there's no set way to be a Christian. I catch a lot of flack for this, but I tell people all the time that I am a Christian in principle. So I believe in following the principles of Jesus. But a lot of the doctrine and dogma, I think, is absolute crap.
Yeah, and we've talked about this in previous episodes about how a lot of the doctrine, the dogma, the positions, the theory, even large chunks of the theology were tools that we developed to be assistive. And if they're not helping, we don't need to keep using them.
I paint myself as being like this, you know, pissed off, sarcastic, you know, squeaky wheel in these conversations. But honest to God, like, every time you start bringing that stuff up, it just sets off like my inbuilt, like, pearl clutching alarm. Like, no, you can't say those things.
And I'll admit, that's part of the reason why I wanted a couple other pastors on the podcast, so you can see it ain't just me who's saying that.
It is refreshing and intimidating at the same time to look at. I think that's part of it. It's very intimidating to look at your religion as something that has to be rebuilt, because I think people go to religion a lot of times wanting to find some kind of peace and like stability in their lives.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. But when you realize that a bunch of your religion needs to really be rebuilt from the ground up in order to be practiced in an ethical and like just way, that's very intimidating and not what I think a lot of people want to hear.
You know, I might even argue that it's not that the religion needs to be rebuilt, that we never built the damn thing in the first place. You know, when Constantine came around, we converted into an imperial system and we're like, okay, let's build a state system, and Christianity's been a state system. We never built the damn religion to start with.
I couldn't have said it better. I think that is so true. I think we've been taking something that was used as a tool of control and just trying to rework it instead of doing what needs to be done and blowing it up and saying, let's start from the bottom up, using the person of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus as a model for what it means to be radically welcoming, radically inclusive, radically loving, all of those things, right? And we use those terms in church so often, but like, I don't think that there are many people who actually want to live that out because it costs to do that. It like, the reason why you don't hear pastors talking like this is because it removes their ability to control. And nobody wants to talk about how, I won't say most, but there's this inherent desire to be in a position of control, like that nobody talks about, that draws people to ministry. It puts you in a position of power. And so
yeah, we love that.
Yeah, exactly. And so if we don't wrestle with that, if we can't name that as the source that needs to be uprooted, then we'll constantly be having talks that actually we should have been done having them a long time ago.
So Emmie,
I have a thought and a question to that one. I kind of also, I think my eyes almost fell out of my head, and I saw Courtney's reaction when you said not viewing the cross as salvific. That was where the pearl clutching alarm, as Courtney put it, based on her reaction started. And I think I know it would be pretty hard to teach all of Christendom right now that it's Jesus in his time was fighting a completely different system as opposed to what we have now, where Christianity is pretty much de facto state religion, even though it's not really state religion officially. So it's a different system completely. But you could teach that, and there's also, obviously everybody knows the parables where Jesus has dinner with the tax collector or befriends the prostitute or you name it. He was always with the outcasts and the sinners. And why is that so difficult for congregations to do, of the lay people to welcome? I mean, not every church is different. There are some that are really welcoming, but that's where you run into trouble as well. Like, I think it would be, we could improve in more than one way here. I don't disagree. I don't disagree with us blowing up the system and starting over, obviously, but that's hard to do. And like, we can't, Courtney and I cannot just blow up the system the same way a clergy person could blow up the system. But what can we do in terms of like dealing with unwelcoming sorts or the playing victim?
Well, I think, and I want to throw this out here, and Emmie, I want to get your take on this because you've been quiet for a little bit, and B, I know you and I have had a couple of good discussions on exactly what I'm about to talk about here. But you mentioned the parables, and particularly when we're talking about LGBTQ, add disclaimer here, the same as JJ said earlier. When we're talking about those particular subsets of issues, there is a desire to ignore the parables, but B, to ignore and this will play into the biblical literacy bit of it too, but to ignore some of the context surrounding some of the parables that we'd rather not have that context to. One of the ones that always comes to mind for me is Jesus and the Centurion's servant, which is one of my favorites because, like,
just pals doing pal things.
Just guys doing guy things as best friends were. He was his servant. He did things for him, And Jesus
I
encounters.
read a whole thing on the Greek and the words used to describe that servant that was quite fascinating.
Exactly.
The specific word and the hierarchy of servants. And
Yeah. And that's where biblical literacy is a big issue, because if you actually read the damn thing in the actual damn language, then you realize it's not saying what you are saying it says. I don't believe this that word means what you think it means, type stuff. So, Emmie, I wanted to get your comment on that, because I know you and I have had discussions about some of these parables before.
I'm trying to think of some of our past discussions, because I'm mainly just taking things in right now. It's so nice to hear different perspectives, and it's good, like as someone who doesn't work in a parish ministry, my hospital is my parish, but like honestly, throughout the day, I'm with people who like are of many different religions, and sometimes I understand the agnostics and atheists more than I understand the Christians, because I was an agnostic/atheist for 20 years, and sometimes I don't recognize the Christian theology of my Christian patients. And I'm like, whoa, like, oh boy, that was a lot. Like, can we go back and tell me where you learned that you can't be mad at God or you can't doubt God? Like, show me what page that was on. Like,
He needs to read
I
Job.
want to learn more, right? Like, let's open the Psalms. Let's see all these words of all these people, right? But so I'm thinking of someone who's working outside of a traditional context, where like the hospital has done a lot of harm to people, right? Like hospital systems in general have done a lot of harm to people, and like my general role in my own blowing up my system that I'm in is making sure that patients are talked about with dignity, right? Patients are talked about with dignity, patients are treated with dignity, patients are never called words like vegetable or anything like that, because I believe in the inherent dignity of all people, regardless of what they can do. So that's like my blowing up the system thing that I do on a daily basis. And so it's like, it's always interesting for me to hear from like, what are people trying to do within the church? And I mean, the parables are just so striking, right? Like, parables are striking in terms of who he spends time with and who he doesn't enjoy spending time with. The people who thought he would enjoy spending time with them often are sort of labeled as, well, you misunderstood the point, right? Like, you misunderstood the point. And so that word doesn't mean what you think it means, kind of thing. And it makes me sad. Like, I think it was Courtney who was talking about, like, you have this whole long book and you go ahead and circle 6 verses in them, and that those verses all of a sudden become more important than all of the parables and all of the stories of him going and sitting with the exact kind of person that Christians wouldn't want showing up in their church, right? Like, they don't want someone who is transgender and like not quote unquote passing.
Yeah. They don't want someone they can tell is trans.
Yeah.
Like, they don't want that. Like, they'll never necessarily say it in those moderate evangelical churches, because they're so focused on like, well, we're not the Westboro Baptist Church, right? We don't think that you're evil just for existing. We just don't like the evil that you do, or whatever it is. And so like, no one's going to say it for the most part in these sort of evangelical churches that like think that they have a lot of context around the scripture, right? Because their pastor will be like, we're going to do a deep dive in the book of Romans for the next 3 months, and then there's 40-minute long sermons. But like, what books aren't being preached on, right? Like, James is never preached on in that kind of church, and like other books.
Spending time with Micah.
Yeah, Micah is never preached on in that kind of church. Like, I was reading the book like Too Long recently, which is about the inherent interconnection between American Christianity and white supremacy, because all throughout the building of America, pastors were the same people who were inviting people to lynch mobs, or were doing the lynching, or were on the white citizens council people, or, you know, we're the mayor, or this or that. So there was this like stamp of approval on these sorts of things. And so like there is this like, they talked about the slave Bible where like it was only like 10% of the Bible, and the slave owners had ripped out all of the prophets and anything that could potentially be used to liberate people or inspire them to see that God has liberatory plans. And so like I think about that when I think about church's sermon series. Like, what are you not preaching on, or what do you preach on as if it is 80% of the text? Do you ever preach on the angry prophet? Do you ever preach on the parables where Jesus is like very uninterested in the outwardly religious people and very interested in those who like people don't want in their church now?
Mm-hmm. And that shapes an identity too within Christians, the ignorance of these larger chunks of the Bible. And I got a colleague of mine who was by no means me, who was in their ordination process and told someone on their ordination committee that the primary theme of the Bible is liberation, and got smacked down hard for that and told, you haven't read the Bible. And the correct answer to that is, of course, no, I just haven't read the same 6 verses you're reading.
Yeah.
And the worst part about this is and I'm going to use this as a mild redirect because I want to get us back a little bit towards some of the LGBTQ issues that we've been talking about. What I think is kind of one of the rough parts about this is that those 6 verses that are highlighted here are often themselves completely misunderstood. And of course, that's the clobber passages for one. But they're often completely, and I don't just say misinterpreted, because that phrase is so abused in our discourse around the Bible. But I say literally misunderstood, as in you are using words in a translation that do not reflect the words in the original text. The verse that we all know from Leviticus is one of the best examples of that. The man shall not lay down with man, that actually says man shall not lay down with little boys.
Because that was very common in some cultures at that point, as just, this is what we do.
Yeah, so like, you know, I don't want to talk too much, but yeah.
So I think what's important in the conversation that we haven't touched on, as we think about the church's negative response to people who are part of the queer community, right? I don't think any of us have dared to talk about our own evolution around our own thought process of queer inclusion in the church. So I will be the first to say I was not always as progressive as I am now on the issue of sexuality. Because I grew up in a very conservative space.
Same.
that said, if you were not involved in a cis heteronormative marriage as the only expression of love and the only system for procreation and all of those other things that you hear in conservative evangelicalism, for years I held on to that. Until I started to wrestle with the text for myself. The reason why I think that's important to name in a conversation like this is because it creates space for the people who we pastor and the people who we sit in church with to wrestle with for themselves, to say, hey, I was not always where I am. It took some willingness to be able to listen to other people, and a willingness to wrestle, and a willingness to be corrected and called out on my BS. There are plenty of people who I know, not when it comes to issues of queerness, but most of my ministry experience has been in predominantly white spaces. And I know several people who I've worked on staff with at churches who were deeply, deeply, deeply racist and did not realize how racist they were. And now they've begun doing the work of really understanding how they perpetuated white supremacy and ignorance and racism in doing some of the things that they had done for years. And a lot of them have come back and said, you know, I was wrong for the stuff that I did. But that would have never happened had the space not been created for them by other white folks to say, hey, like, there's room for growth and there's room for wrestling here. And so I think it's important to talk about inclusion, but I think we do need to be honest and say, not all of us were always where we are now.
Yes.
Yeah, I want to double down on that a little bit too. And this is something that, as you know, cishet white guy, I've honestly gotten a lot of feedback for saying, and not any of it positive. But I do firmly believe that part of the journey towards the inclusive society we want involves making room for people to grow. And there is an instinct when we encounter people who have these admittedly very abhorrent views that we can stand here, and Lord knows I have done this, stood up in the pulpit and said that that is fundamentally anti-Christian. But there is a desire we have to take that one step farther and say that is fundamentally anti-Christian. Get the fuck out of here. And I think that is, and this isn't, not everybody agrees with me on this, and I understand why, because you don't want people with those views in your community. But I have yet to encounter a satisfactory answer that explains how do we get towards the world we want without making that space.
Yeah.
I think my thought about it is as a layperson who doesn't have to keep, or is not trying to reconcile with everyone and doesn't have to keep these abhorrent views in their echo chamber or in their space, it becomes kind of an echo chamber. And I would say I have a very good understanding of the Clobber passages, what they actually say, what their contexts are, to the point where when friends argue about LGBT issues, I chime in and Don tells me I'm right. So that's happened a few times.
Which I love doing.
I find, especially when someone wants to argue with me, because I don't have any supposed education in it other than self-teaching. But I think what happens with my thoughts on the LGBT space in the church is that the only people remaining that I can talk to about this are the modern, I would say modern, moderate or even left-leaning evangelicals. If you want, sounds really weird, but they're on the left side of that space, and they're always super willing to do the mental logic needed to disregard Leviticus, because they don't want to be seen as cherry picking. But then you get to the New Testament, and then they have problems. So what do? I know what the problem with the New Testament is, with Paul making up words and other things in Greek, and but try telling them that, and they're like, that's too much. So my answer to that is that we have deified Paul in a way that that Paul should have never been put on the pedestal that Paul has been put on. There are many Christians who quote Paul more than they do Jesus. And if it were up to me, I'd say that a lot of what Paul has, because Paul is credited with a good amount of what's in the New Testament, I think a lot of it is absolute trash. And that's going to get me in trouble with a lot of people, but I don't really care.
Which is the sound of me completely not disagreeing with that, by the way. But I want to throw this piece out here too, that let's not forget that Paul wasn't included in the majority of the New Testament because they thought he was the best example. He was included because literally everyone else was wiped the fuck out by the Romans.
That is true. So I think we need to wrestle with, and this is why I love being a part of a denomination that holds to the idea that God is still speaking. It is one of the some would say it's a marketing line of the UCC. I would say it's actually central to how we kind of navigate denominationalism and just faith in general. The belief that God did not stop speaking when the canon was closed. I think that is the way that you combat the veneration of Paul. Say that there are testaments still being formed today within Christian community and beyond. So I'm one of those people who believes that God is not just speaking through the echo chamber of Christianity. I think depending on who you talk to, God can be found and the gospel can be experienced through just regular conversation. And I realize that when I say gospel, that has a heavily Christian connotation to it. But when I'm using the term gospel, I simply mean there's good news to be shared across faith traditions outside of Christianity. And so for me, the answer to the problems in the New Testament would be, why are we narrowing our sources down to just these 66 books? And in some cases, beyond the 66 books, if we look at the Apocrypha.
Yeah. And now, Courtney, you and I have talked about this before, about trying to encounter God in places other than church or religious institutions. I know this is something that's been weighing on you too.
Yeah, I've had a lot of sort of spiritual crises over, the last 20 years or whatever. But one of the points at which I realized maybe spiritual crisis wasn't necessarily a bad thing for me and was God's way of pointing me in his direction on the path that I could reach him best, was through other things. It was the realization that the most sacred, genuine feeling, religious type experience that I had in I didn't know how long, what had to do with basically just like meditating in the energy of the solar eclipse that we had a few years back. Like, and I know this is some full on like lesbian witchcraft crap. I know. Like I'm out there just like covered in my crystals and in my hippie stuff and just like, and I mean, I can make fun of myself about it despite the fact that I'm still dressed in practically the same outfit today, but like, it was legitimately the biggest God feeling that I had in, I couldn't tell you how long. And I was like, I've been doing something wrong. If not only this is the closest I've been in a long time, not that that's necessarily wrong, but just that I've somehow gotten to a place where I'm convinced that something that brings me close to the divine is bad, that like I have to hide that or feel bad about that. And I mean, coming up like in the 80s and early 90s, there was so much of the just satanic panic bullshit about, the New Agers and like, as Don just wipes his face.
Everybody does the Picard face palm at this point.
Just, I mean, like I'm a hopeless flower child, like I get a moment of spiritual wonder watching my 18-month-old daughter pluck a flower and try to give it to a tree. I'm like, this is magical. This is special. And no, I haven't had that feeling in a long time with organized religion, not since I was really small and full of wonder and not quite as cognizant of the bullshit that has just permeated organized Christianity as I know it. So like, I don't remember where this started off from because I ramble, so I'm going to pass it off to someone else.
I'll add on to that I went through a kind of a rebellious phase because I grew up in Western Michigan, very conservative area. And when I went to college with Don, and Hope College is also very conservative. And I went through kind of a rebellious phase where I went there to try to strengthen my faith, go to the church, whenever, and it got weaker and weaker throughout. And
that didn't work for either of us.
It didn't work, yeah. And it got to a point where it was like kind of this rebellion against establishment, to the point where I took a tune from like the old Gnostic Christians, and like we're talking way back, and tried to use tarot as a form of prayer.
Oh, I remember that.
And that was a new, like you talk about your crystals.
I've done tarot reading. I think it's a great way to tap into your own subconscious truth, but
it is. But I was thinking like, you can't put God in a box that says God can't speak to me through these cards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I tried it. I still know how to read tarot cards to this day because of that, but I don't do it anymore.
Yeah. And that is a big issue with a lot of our theology and our philosophy and our institutional bullshit. It's been all about putting God in a box. And look, I could tell you similar stories. You were there about when I was at Hope College. I went to Hope College for the exact same reason, to strengthen my faith. And that did not last.
They had a good theater program. What was wrong with me?
Yeah. I mean, it didn't last very long because as you well know, Steve, about 10 minutes in, I'd already managed to grab myself a big ass black cloak and was hiding in the shadows. And then I turned around, and at one point I said, "Screw you, organized religion," and declared myself Pope and tried to start a new religion. Like,
I remember that.
Yeah, you remember that, right? Like we all reacted so badly.
You tried to make me a cardinal.
You know, I figured, what the hell, if the Catholics can do it, why not? I mean, it's all complete crap anyway. But you know, I was being a ridiculous teenager, but we were all dancing around the same idea, which is that all of these structures, all of these methodology, all the things that we have put in place, they're utterly human constructs. The Bible says exactly nothing about them. Jesus said exactly nothing about them other than to say, it's full of shit. And so every time these organized structures lead into saying, this is the way it must be, then what they're saying is, this is the way it must be so that I can exercise control.
I think what you all are touching on, what is the common thread between everything that I've heard, is the human desire for something transcendent. Like, we all are born with this inherent desire to be connected to something bigger than us. But the truth is, for me, a long time ago, and I think this is what drove me to pursue a lifetime of ministry, at least I hope, is trying to create space for people to connect to that transcendentness in whatever way works for them. And so I know a lot of people may listen to me and say, well, you know, how then can you call yourself a Christian minister and believe that whatever way works? But it is not up to me to determine how it is that you relate to God or the divine, or how you articulate your relationship with God or the divine. My job is just to open the door and to point you in a direction that will give your life a sense of purpose and connection beyond yourself. And so I may be doing this whole pastoring thing wrong, but I really do believe that is ultimately my call. And I think that comes from having this very expanded view of what it means to, quote unquote, preach the good news to people, right? I'm not there to push you into a box, but really to help you live into what it means to be your most authentic self, which is what I believe was the original hope of religion in the first place. How do we tap into the fullness of who we were created to be? And somewhere along the line, it became, oh, this is a great tool to control people. So screw authenticity. How do we keep them, you know, in line?
Now, this is where I want to step in for a second. I want to kick this over to Emmie, because this is something that's been dancing in my head as you've been talking, is this reaction that people have when they have that encounter with the divine. And I'm not sure if it's fear or reverence that causes someone to encounter the divine, or indeed through encountering the divine, a sense of their own mortality. and immediately want to exercise control. Now, I'm kicking it to Emmie because I know that in our time as chaplains, we've both seen this in folks on their deathbed who are confronted with their own mortality, who are confronted with the prospect of Almighty God, not as an abstract, but as a dude I got an appointment with in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
When you have that moment, all of a sudden, control becomes everything. And I want to see, Emmie, can you maybe speak more about that? Because I know you have way more experience encountering that than I do.
Would you mind clarifying a little bit?
What I'm talking about is, and I said this is something I've seen when people are near death, is when they start trying to encounter God, or when they start actually encountering God, that they want to exert control over their life, that they want to exert control over other factors, control over the people around them. Suddenly, in last moments, I've seen this. I got a guy I know who's going through this right now, where he's facing death, and all of a sudden he wants to control everything.
Yeah.
That desire, when you're confronted with the divine, or when confronting the divine makes you aware of your own mortality, or whatever it is psychologically there, that encounters with the divine suddenly inspire in a lot of us a desire to control and not a desire to submit, which is what you would think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just fascinating to see the different ways that people respond, right? Like, some people, all they want to do is submit, to the point where they're taking away their own agency and how they're understanding what's going on, and just sort of saying, whatever God's will is. And it's like, well, you can co-create that will with God, right? Like, you can't always change the cancer, but you can change some of the ways that you're going about this process, or, whatever it is. And then there are some people who all of a sudden want control over all the things, because they're afraid that once they're gone, those things won't get done right, or those things, whatever it is. Like, there is just this sense, there is this real sense of either giving all to God, or giving all to one's own hand. And I wonder if we see that in other places too.
Well, I've said too much already, so I'm going to let you guys jump in on this.
It's a bit of a tangent, but the thing that's coming to mind, and I think in something like this train of thought, is something that we should search for the divine in. The idea of relinquishing control. I know a lot of people, I love a lot of people who really look at the giving over of control, just giving it to God. And I do this sometimes too, as just being the utmost in, like, being the goal. The goal is to give it all over to God. And I do feel like there are places in which, at least for me, and again, I'm not trying to dictate doctrine here. I'm just some, chick sitting on her, bed in West Michigan. But I feel like there's a lot of compulsion to just hand over all responsibility and all decision making and all everything, just like, oh, well, if I just live my life the way that this religion tells me to, exclusively, and I don't I'm not questioning it, I'm just treating what this church says is God's will as my blueprint, and if I'm just giving over, telling myself that I don't care about any of the bad things that happen or anything like that, if I just give myself over completely to God, then it'll fix everything. But like, we're human beings. You can never fully, I mean, there are some people I'm sure who can. I'm kind of losing my own point here. I guess what I'm getting at is, I feel like there are a certain percentage of people who want to give over responsibility for their own decision making.
I see what you're getting at here, and this is something, I mean, you guys know I've preached at a number of different times, is this tendency to use God as an excuse to do nothing, to say, well, God's got it. What the hell do I have to do?
Or use God as an excuse to say, well, the Bible is the blueprint for my life. And so I know all the answers and I can't do anything wrong as long as I act in those parameters.
Yeah. It is basically that kind of surrender is using the Bible as a way to avoid asking Reddit's favorite question. Am I the asshole?
That actually reminds me of something that I would really like to talk with everybody in this group. I know we're, not long on time, but that I would really like to talk. Well, at least I'm not. I've got like 20 minutes left before my computer dies. But
well, get it out there. Let's hear it.
I've been developing this notion that a radical notion makes it sound all high-minded. Really, I think it's just like a hot take that a lot of people might not agree with. I'm coming around to the idea, and I've run across this in my 1.5 long so far quest to raise a tiny human and try and make her the finest person I can make, in as much as it's up to me, I'm coming around to the idea that the idea of I'm always so nervous saying this to someone. I've only ever brought this up to a couple of people. I'm coming around to the idea that good people and bad people is a terrible concept.
Oh God, yes.
That we don't need to be labeling anyone good person or bad person. We can label this action good, this effect someone had on another person or society or whatever, this thing bad, this action bad, or this action good. But labeling people good or bad, I am starting to think is the source of a lot of the problems that we have as a society.
I want to interject. I totally agree, but my pearl clutching alarm bells went off. That sounds remotely like hate the sinner or hate the sin, but love the sinner.
I can see people taking it in that direction. I'm thinking more along the lines of my issue is honestly comes around a bit more to the people who label themselves good people. And I think most of us, I would say the overwhelmingly vast majority of people either think that they're good people or think that they're trying to be good people, which puts them in, good people adjacent. So at that point, I'm glad I'm cracking y'all up.
I like that phrase, good people adjacent. Excellent.
Adjacent is a spectacular word. I love it. But like if you've decided, okay, I am a good person, or at least I'm not perfect. None of us are perfect. People can embrace that, but they don't quite get to where that leads. If you label yourself a good person, there's this tendency, I think, and I think we see it a lot in the way that people interact today, to say, okay, well, I'm a good person. I wouldn't do something, evil. So they're incapable of seeing the evil in their own actions. I feel like this also kind of carries over on the flip side of this is, I'm not trying to dig into cancel culture, but the idea that if someone does a bad thing, distinctly, we can identify this as a bad thing, that whole person is labeled bad, like the whole shebang. I feel like it when you start categorizing people as good and bad, and there's always the reducto ad Hitlerum to it, like, okay, well, what about you? Are you trying to say Hitler wasn't a bad person? On the one hand, no. But on the one hand, yes, I'm trying to say he did an astronomical number of horrifically bad things. Isn't that a more important metric than trying to say, okay, Hitler bad? Yeah, we can agree on that. That's not going into why, how, which are the more important things, because it's very easy to label, the obvious bad. Again, everybody always cites Hitler, so that's what I bring up. But
you're right on that, and I want to.
Can I get one little thing in here quick?
Go ahead.
Sorry, this is a stump that I've been on in my head for a long time, and it's nice to get it out. It makes it easy to demonize the people that we label bad, and I don't just mean to say bad thing is bad. I mean to say bad thing is evil and not human. Like, no, this is all evil that men do. This is all, and I'm not meaning to imply gender there. It's just, the phrasing. This is all individual decisions that we make. If we just say, okay, well, a very bad person did this and none of us are anything like them. No, we all could be that guy. It's all the decisions we make.
No, I want to throw this at you. I want to throw this at you real quick, because you've hit on exactly the point I wanted to throw out to what Steve was saying a second ago, which is the whole hate the sin, love the sinner thing. And well, the thing is hate the sin, love the sinner. And here's a hot take for you. The phrase hate the sin, love the sinner is the OG all lives matter. It is a phrase that means it is a phrase that is exactly literally true. It is a thing we should absolutely all believe, but is weaponized to mean the exact opposite of what it's fucking for. Yeah.
Yeah, you're only saying this about
realization
you don't approve of.
Yeah.
So I would say I would throw this question out to Courtney. Isn't everything that you said, right? Isn't that the basis for this entire conversation though? The question of bad thing, bad people, good thing, good people. Like the whole basis of the question of why not be exclusionary toward people who are part of the LGBTQ community. Like, we want to clean our hands of being guilty of excluding folks because we don't want to be defined as bad people. So it's really easy to like say, oh no, that's not true of me. Like, I'm not a bad person because I'm not doing that. So I think that is the basis for this entire discussion. What is the impulse within us to want to create that line in the sand that says we're on this side of the fence and they're on that side of the fence, instead of like naming that it doesn't make us good and bad people. We really have a problem with, I guess, pushing people beyond the margins. We're not even marginalizing people. We're pushing them beyond the margins of community. Yeah. And so that ends up being at the heart of this whole distinction and dichotomy of, or between what's good and bad.
Yeah. Well, I think in a couple things, jumping off of that. One, I feel like in religion and in society in general, we've gotten into this team sports mentality. I mean, in politics, the red versus blue is hilariously obvious. But I do feel like, and you mentioned, I believe it was you that mentioned the whole, joint enemy thing really, like, it's effective at bringing people together, but is that necessarily a good thing? Again, the ADD is getting me. I had something else for that too, but someone else go.
your team metaphor is one that I like, and I had this conversation with someone a couple years back. I can't remember who it was. It might have been you, for all I recall. Is that, as Christians, we like to put ourselves on, let's say, the red team, and we like to put all the Hindus on the blue team and all the other people on the green team. And what we don't realize is that Jesus was saying, let's all stop playing the game and go have lunch together. And of course, we as Christians on the red team, we immediately hear, okay, well, Jesus was saying, let's all come together. So let's all come together and beat the hell out of the umpire. Like, we can't grasp that the whole argument of the gospel wasn't to redefine the bounds of the teams. The argument of the gospel was to drop the game and go have lunch together.
Yeah.
And the funny thing about that metaphor is that in most denominational settings, if you were to preach that, you'd get in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that's definitely not something that's happened to me before.
Yeah, like only because I know so many backstories.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's funny that really is the heart of Jesus's message. It's actually in a prayer that he prays before, he's crucified. God, I pray that they would all be one as we are one, and yet to preach that particular type of message within certain spaces is deemed as radical, or even I would go as far as to say, people would say that's universalism, and the Christian church has no space for that.
Oh, does it not?
and I'm one of those. Well, I'll leave that for another episode. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. It's like, oh, we're veering into dangerous territory. It's like, oh, so the salvation of all people is dangerous territory. I see.
Yeah.
I'll tell you one
It becomes a
thing.
matter of not everybody can be in our club, or it's not exclusive anymore.
I'll tell you one thing from personal experience. You never want to get in a room with a group of theologians who have power over you and say, well, you could just say God in three persons that we know of.
Oh man.
You say so many things that would get you kicked out of church.
How many times have I gotten kicked out of church, y'all? I mean, I got to be honest with you. I think half the reason I went to get ordained was I just got sick of getting kicked out of churches. So I figured I may as well get one of my own.
But I wonder if the problem with even our system is that we are so afraid of being kicked out.
Yeah.
That we really don't. We dare not say the thing that the Spirit is really emboldening us to say, because we're so afraid of not being a part of the team. And I think that is the danger of wanting to be those people who change the system from the inside out, is inevitably you become a part of the system. So this is why I'm saying, to be a clergy person who represents, I wish it were not true, but as a clergy person who represents institutionalized religion, and organized religion, it is difficult to want to be one of those people who says we need to blow this thing up and rebuild it from the ground up, because in a lot of ways you are dependent upon the system to continue making it, and so that becomes the struggle. We want to create a space where everybody belongs, but in doing so, we run the risk of no longer belonging.
I think this also goes partially to what we talked about in our last conversation, Don, where we talked about we talked about it in other terms, but it's almost like a trap or a temptation, if you will, of, as a clergy person, being able to claim the will of God.
Well, here's the thing, and I'm gonna strut my geek cred here for a minute. Every single clergy person is Isildur. Anybody get it? I see Courtney got it.
No, I get it.
Lord of the Rings
my
joke.
favorite novel.
Every single clergy person is Isildur, because we took one look at that one ring of power and said, you know what, I could probably use that.
Throw it into the fire.
But I wonder in saying that, Don, what is at the heart of wanting that ring so that you can use it to do something with it?
Well,
I think
maybe it'd be better to say we're all Boromir then. We all wanted it, but for good reasons.
And that's what I'm trying to get at. I think we all come into it with great intentions to do something to the system from the inside out. But it doesn't often end up being that way.
Yeah.
You got to find a way to end up being more like Gandalf, who, through this ring, I would do great good, but through me, it would do great evil. You got to end up being like Galadriel, who says, no, this is okay.
Yeah.
I'm not doing this. And also I'm leaving,
Yeah, I mean, that's honestly, that's where I'm at right now. Is I got my ass canned from my last job for standing up to people who want to abuse power. We have to be willing to do that, and we have to be willing to bear the consequences for it, because hey, we are following in the footsteps of a savior whose whole thing was that.
And so I think that takes us back to Steve's earlier question, as folks who are quote unquote lay people, right? how can you help clergy dismantle the system? I think, and I answer the question from the perspective of someone who has been a chaplain for a long time and now serving in a church, working with the congregation. One of the greatest challenges to wanting to rebuild the system from the inside out is often not having the buy-in that you need or would love to have in doing that dismantling work from the inside, from people in the congregation. One of the greatest detriments to moving forward with an agenda that is true to the gospel, that is true to social justice and making the outcast be a part of the community and all of those beautiful things. One of the greatest obstacles to that is the belief that doing it the way we've always done it is going to get us something new. And you'd be amazed at the amount of folks who, when you try to come up with something new, or you do present something new, they say, well, no, we've always done it this way. And so that's the way it has to be done. So I would say advocacy from those who are in the pews for what the clergy is trying to do, at least if there are signs that this would actually move the congregation forward in living out the gospel in a real way, having supporters in the congregation would definitely help that. I know that sounds really obvious, but it's often not as easy to get it to happen when you're working with the congregation.
Well, I feel like as a congregant, it can be kind of hard to pipe up, because for a lot of people who go to church with the kind of regularity that their input in these sort of situations would carry some water, like that's their community. Like that's where their friends are, your kids play together. It's where all your socialization goes on. I feel like there's got to be a fear there of just being ostracized. Like as a parishioner, you stand as a pastor. I know you guys are committed to your congregation, but at the same time, pastors can go on to another church. Like, in fact, they usually do at some point in their lives. But
always.
Well, just in the churches that I've been in, there's always, pastors that come and go. Maybe that's not typical. I should be open to my own limited experience, but like for parishioners, it's usually a matter of they live in that community, and like getting ostracized from your own church for speaking up on something that matters to you would be in this town. Have fun. Have fun dealing with that. Like it's a big ask for the average person. I mean, I worry about coming off as a little kooky to, other moms at the playground trying to find play dates for my kid. And I have been like already ostracized by one mom for, I don't know if it was the social justice or the bi thing or what, but it's scary for, I think, most people to be in a place where they might be uprooting their entire social structure.
Now, I'm gonna throw this out here as a means of response and also shameless plug, but that is my theory is, and that's at the heart of the community that we're building here, is this belief that you have to be intentional about openness and communication, and not just about like honesty. Like you have to be, in building a Christian community, the pastors, the leadership first, have to be intentional about establishing this as a place where you can question stuff, where you can own mistakes, where you can own weirdness. Like you need to have, for a community to function in the way we need it to, you need to have a community where the pastor can get up in front and say, y'all, I'm a freak. And you got to roll with it from there. And everybody has to be willing to, to put that freak flag on, to be who they are in that community. And it has to be led from the front in that way. If you feel inclined to check websites and you look on our website, I actually, on our About page, I did a whole Q&A about this sort of stuff. And one of the things I said is, you know, are there people with dissenting opinions here, basically? Yes, there are. And we welcome that, because we're going to have arguments. We're going to piss each other off. There are going to be people here who are old and have conservative views and are trying to grow. And there are going to be people here who aren't okay with that. And a part of this journey together is being willing to have the conversation and not kick anyone the fuck out because we don't like the questions they're asking.
I think at the heart of what you just shared, Don, is the reality. We talked about this earlier, right? There's this inherent desire to be connected to something that is transcendent. And so I think whether a person is clergy or you are a congregant or parishioner, we all at our core, we don't want to be put out of the bounds of community. Mm-hmm. That is really what I'm hearing in all of this. Like, yeah, I don't want to lose my sense of connectedness to other people, both as a pastor and the person who's receiving from the pastor. And so I commend you for wanting to do the work to say, you know, we're going to try to remove as many obstacles as we can to that being a fear. So you can come here with your questions, your doubts, your wonderings, your wanderings. All of those things are welcome, because we're all on the journey of trying to belong in some way, shape, or form, which is what I believe is like the best example of what a truly spiritually healing community looks like. Too bad we don't have many more examples of it. So.
Yeah, it is really healing to know that if you share an opinion, there won't be moms who ostracize you and no longer want your kids to play with their kids. You know, it's really important to know that you're part of something where your whole life won't fall apart because of dissenting opinion. And that's what we were talking about earlier, is like the moderate of being like, I have opinions, but I don't want to share them because I'm afraid of the consequences.
A moderate is just a radical who's terrified.
I think these are all awesome ideas. I feel like I'm the squeaky wheel again, so I might as well be the person to throw in on this. I think it's also important to keep in mind like the needs of people who have been heavily marginalized, that they might not have the spoons, they might not have the space emotionally to deal with coddling people who need to learn that they're people. I have a lot of empathy for that. I feel like it's you know, like you can't just ask someone in a marginalized group to just be the sounding board for a bunch of folks just figuring their business out and necessarily just be okay with that. Volunteering for it is, I think, incredibly noble work, but I don't think it should be universally expected of people. I think there is something to be said for a safe space being available as well for people who just need to not hear from people who are like, are you sure they're a person worthy of the same amount of respect? You know,
using a marginalized person or somebody abused by the church as a case study for others is probably not.
Yeah, and here's
approach is basically springboarding out. Courtney says, I think case study is a pretty good word for it. It's not, you're not really treating them like a person either.
Yeah.
You're just using them as a sounding board.
Now here's the thing: when we're talking about situations like this, there is a certain degree of pastoral responsibility in situations like you're describing here. You know, we like to talk, us pastors like to talk a good game about being preachers and teachers. But when we think about teachers, we're thinking, I'm preparing lessons to give you information. No, being a teacher is a lot of breaking up conflicts and telling, no, Timmy, don't eat the paste. No, you can't make fun of him because he's gay. Shut up. teacher role of a pastor is community regulation. It's like, look, he doesn't have the spoons to deal with your shit right now, so I'm going to pull you aside and tell you you're being an ass, and this is why. And it's not because I hate you, and I'm not pushing you out of community either, but you need to shut all of the way the hell up and listen to what's being told to you, because you are being a complete and utter dick. And the pastor has to be the one to do that. Like, because you can't expect, as you're quite right, you can't expect your spoon-deprived members of your community to be the ones who are responsible for providing that pushback. Now, should a pastor express that pushback in the, shall I say, colorful terms by which I just did? Probably not. Unless it's the sort of person who's receptive to that, in which case, definitely go ahead and do that. But what I am saying is that the pastor should be, this is what we're for, is, the preaching is a side effect. Like, we're supposed to do that. We're supposed to communicate information, sure. But making sure that the community can stay united together in Christ is pretty much the job. So that's
Please,
why
I need to interject. I might be disappearing anytime now because my computer is almost completely dead. I've turned down the screen and it's still flashing in the corner. So I might have to.
So if you
call it.
If you drop off, what's going to happen? We'll continue the conversation as long as we damn well feel like, and then when you drop off, that'll be where we cut for part 2.
I think I may drop off at the same time as her.
Oh, God, that was perfect.
Oh my gosh. Good work.
Good timing on that one.
So we're going to draw to a close here. For those of you who've still been watching, I want to thank you for listening along this far. As you've probably noticed, we have wound up recording so long that we've broken this up into 2 parts. So this ending here is kind of serving for both parts. So for the 2 of us that are the 2 of you that are still here, do you have anywhere that people can find you, anywhere you want to plug, or would you rather not be associated with this?
If you're looking for me on social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you can find me at RevJJFlag, REVJJFLAG, for all of those things, and look forward to connecting with you.
All right, Steve, you got anything you want to promote as long as we're closing up here?
As for me right now, I'm working as a consultant, and life is transient by nature. So I will be moving around in the next 3 to 6 months. I bet we'll be moving somewhere, whether it be back home. And so I don't really have anything to promote or where you can find me right now, but I look forward to the next adventure is all I can add.
All right. Well, we'll close out with the usual pluggables for our own community here. If you've been watching this, you're not part of the community, our Discord servers where we do most of the stuff. You can find the link to that on our website, which will be down in the description. We also got a couple other video series that come out in the week. We've got our Thursday Psalms from the Trails on, I'm going to say Sundays, but it's usually more like Mondays these days is when our scripture and sermons come out. So you can check those out. They're all on the same channels. We get them on our podcast stream, YouTube channel. They usually come out on Facebook as well. The Psalms one also comes out on Instagram because it's small enough to fit there. And last but not least, we have a get together every Saturday on our Discord server as well, 10:30 p.m. Japan time, and that's 9:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday mornings for you guys over there. So if you want to join us for some of that, hop on the Discord server, join us there, have fun. But for everybody else, we're going to sign off here. If you're watching this at the end of part 1, stay tuned next week for part 2, where Reverend Dr. JJ Flagg and I and Steve continue the conversation into a bunch of other different topics. If you're watching this at the end of part 2, holy crap, thank you for sticking along for both parts. It's great to see you on both. Have a great week, and we will see you next week, whenever that next week is. Take care.